State akin to sleep is the hallmark of Neville's teachings. It's not the only thing he taught, but it's a huge component of what he instructs us to do. There's been a recent trend to say it's not necessary. I agree. It may be possible to do this stuff without it, but I think it's wrong to lessen its importance to an optional extra. Neville banged on about it for a reason. However, I also think it's somewhat misunderstood. I'm going to try, to the best of my ability, to explain its importance and how to do it most effectively. At its simplest, SATS can be described as falling asleep imagining a scene that implies that your desire has been fulfilled. Here's what I view as important. Firstly, you must believe and understand that your imaginary scene is as good as reality. Something that I think trips people up is the view that SATS is a mere technique to help you get somewhere. Don't view it as a means to an end. Don't view it as a box-ticking exercise. Instead, see it as good as the real thing. I understand that this is sometimes difficult, but I believe this is essential. If you're doing your SATS with the excitement that it will someday lead to the real thing, you're tripping yourself up. This is really about using your imaginal senses to go to a certain place and live out a certain thing within actual time and space. This is why Neville talks about giving your imaginal scenes all the trappings of reality. Don't just imagine a certain room, see it. Be in it. Neville was not just walking down the streets in NYC imagining he was in Barbados. He was in Barbados, and that is the crucial difference. It may take practice. Let's take the ladder experiment. You don't just imagine yourself climbing a ladder. You feel the rungs of the ladder in your hands. You feel your legs moving. You feel the metal or the wood under your fingers, etc. You are climbing a ladder, not performing the act of someone imagining that they are climbing a ladder. In the same vein, this is why you do it in the first person, simply because you live your life in the first person. Here's an example from my own life. A couple of years ago, I, like many others, was trying to manifest a specific person back into my life. It had been about 3 months of fairly limited success. I remember the night clearly. I was reading some Neville and I realized the importance of making it feel physically real, of going to that next step. I'm not just imagining this to be true, it is true. And it is happening. I was lying with my head on a pillow as I did every night. I entered a drowsy state, and then began to focus. This may take time, as it did for me. But eventually, that pillow was no longer my pillow, it was the chest of my SP. I swear I could feel it move along with his breathing. He was there, and I was content with that. I let go of the thoughts and feelings that would eventually lead to the real thing. No, this was the real thing. About 2 weeks later, I did fall asleep with my head on his chest, in this physical reality, just as I had done that night. It was not a shock nor a revelation. It was a natural progression of my reality. You must enter a drowsy state. This is important. It's in the name, state akin to sleep. But why? Neville says, you change your future best when you are in control of your thoughts while in a state akin to sleep, for then the effort is reduced to its minimum. Your attention seems to completely relax, and then you must practice holding your attention within that feeling, without using force, and without using effort. When you enter a drowsy state, your mind is more defenseless. Your everyday senses, which are constantly feeding you information, lessen. There's scientific research for this too. It's called hypnagogia. It is that feeling we all know well of being half asleep, half awake. Sometimes, I used to do SATS in the morning for this reason. While researching the hypnagogic state is difficult, there is evidence of its peculiar effect on brain activity. Researchers have found that reflective thought, the ability to evaluate ongoing experience, declined quickly during the hypnagogic state while thoughts about physical interaction with the imaginary world increased, indicating a change in the structure, and not just the content of conscious thought. Neville was certainly ahead of his time. People, most notably metaphysicians and occultists, have been trying to hack consciousness for a long time. If you're familiar with chaos magic, a system that I believe has overt similarities with Neville, you'll know that one of the foundational things many magicians do is to imagine a certain symbol of their desire during the point of orgasm. The idea is the same. Tackle your mind, your subconscious, at a point when your conscious mind is less able to object. Practice inducing the drowsy state. This brings me to my next point. Get acquainted with the drowsy state. Neville also speaks about practicing this. One of the reasons we do this before sleep and continue the imagining until we fall asleep is that, by necessity, we're going to enter the hypnagogic state. However, it is not strictly necessary that you do it before sleep. You can, technically, enter this state whenever you want. Instead of getting into bed and starting to immediately imagine something, sometimes it's useful to do breathing exercises or meditation first. Unless you're deathly tired the moment you go to bed, you're going to get bored and your mind is going to wander. Sometimes I would simply count breaths. Breathing in equals 1, out equals 2, in equals 3, out equals 4, and so on. This has the effect of slowing down your breathing and focusing your attention away from your day, from your waking thoughts. You can do whatever you want. But that worked for me. By the time I got to around 100, I knew I was going to be in the correct state. What do I imagine? People are obsessed with this question. The idea that picking the scene is of utmost importance is a hindrance in and of itself. I think people believe that imagining the scene is like a magic pill, do it correctly, and that exact scene will play out, which, inevitably, leads to people agonizing over what scene to pick in case they pick the wrong one, etc. I don't subscribe to such a viewpoint. What SATS is about is inducing a state. We're not predicting or influencing the future like some kind of active clairvoyant. You're simply embodying the state where something is true, something is a fact. There is something to be said, however, for picking a scene that does not meddle in the middle. Neville is emphatic about this. You plant the seed, and then you leave it alone. It will then bear fruit. You do not get to see all the roots sprouting, etc. It happens without your knowledge. Let's not overcomplicate this point, however. Think about what you want. Want someone back in your life whom you fell out with. It's not such a good idea to imagine their apology. Instead, you want to imagine something that implies everything as well. Imagine yourselves hanging out, being normal, etc. Maybe they will come back into your life via some grand apology. But maybe they won't. That's not the point. Don't imagine cashing the check, but imagine having the money. Maybe it'll come via check, but maybe it won't. You don't want the check itself. Checks can bounce. You want the money. My practical advice is this: boil down what you want to its simplest form. You don't want a text or a phone call from someone. You want that person's love, affection, and attention. This helps to inform what might be a more effective scene. Apply this to whatever it is. You don't want a job offer. You want to be doing the job. You don't want a pizza delivery. You want to eat the pizza. You don't want the action of buying a new house. You want to be living in that new house. You don't want the contract signed. You want what that contract will bring you, etc. Again, with the SP example from a few years ago. For months I imagined phone calls, text messages, apologies, and grand gestures of "I want you back." They didn't work. Sometimes I could vaguely see their influence, but I never received that exact thing. It worked when I boiled it down to its simplest. I want them here with me, behaving affectionately, being together. And all of that implies my commitment and love. Neville did not imagine receiving the ticket to Barbados itself. He imagined being in Barbados. Reflect on this difference. It need not be the same scene. People also seem to be sometimes hung up on the idea that you need to adhere strictly to one scene, that this scene is of the utmost importance. As I've explained, it is not. It is a technique to convince yourself of the reality that something is true. Remember, we're hacking our subconscious mind. We're not clairvoyant. There's a crucial difference. Do what you want. Enjoy it. What reality do you want to enter? What do you want to feel? It's as simple as that. Remember the golden rule. You're not trying to influence or to get. You're trying to be. Do I have to visualize anything at all? Yes and no. Not necessarily. As I've progressed in my practice, I've begun more often to rely less on the visual trappings of reality and simply fall asleep in the assumption that something is true. Not repeating it to myself as a mantra, but just falling asleep as the person I want to be, with all the things I want to be. This is similar to when Neville told a person who wanted to create multiple things at once to just feel, "Isn't wonderful." Having said that, Neville also puts a great degree of emphasis on training ourselves in the drowsy state to be able to feel the physical reality of somewhere else, to be able to actually see yourself somewhere else, and believe fully the reality of that vision as an actuality. I believe that this is an extremely useful exercise, especially if you haven't had a great degree of success with SATS yet. It allows you to indulge the idea that imagination is real. This is a counterintuitive idea. It doesn't necessarily come naturally to many of us. I've mentioned this before, but I have an acting background based on naturalism. I'm, perhaps, better than most at pretending to be someone else and believing that fully. The natural boundary between reality and pretend has been eroded for me through years of practice. I have been trained in techniques as to how to erode it and how to mentally inhabit a different life. I recognize that most people have not. I believe this is one of the reasons why Neville's techniques relatively intuitive to me, whereas other people's conscious minds may get in the way. In the past, I've mentioned that it is a lot like method acting. Method acting, to its fullest extent, can have a severe impact on the person doing it. It is possible to go so far. Most people, however, haven't done this, haven't experienced this, haven't tried it. For this reason, amongst others, I would advocate that you start with the practice of moving yourself somewhere else, physically, in your mind. This is not just visualization, but involves a step further. Try it. Understand what visualization means in this context. We all visualize all day every day. We all have pictures in our minds. I could tell you to visualize an orange. You can do it. You can see orange in your mind. This is not really what you're being asked to do here. This is why, I think, Neville refers more often to imaginal act than mere visualization. This is just a restating of the above. You're not being asked to visualize something. You're being asked to go somewhere. How long do I have to do it? However long you want. That's all there is to say about this. I firmly believe that there will come a day when you just don't. This likely will not be a conscious decision. You will reach a point where something is so much a fabric of your life that going to the place where it exists is no longer the treat it was. You'll gain more enjoyment from just falling asleep in front of the TV, and that is fine. You are now the person, living a life where something is true, falling asleep in front of your TV. Don't force this point, however. Nothing about any of this should be forced. You can't propel yourself towards any aspect of it with intention. We make nothing happen through sheer force of will. We make everything happen through allowance, and enjoyment and gradual realization. There is a time for every season under the sun. Technically, if you do everything correctly, you need only do it once or not at all. The reality is that we do this as practice. We do it for enjoyment, and we do it for skill. It's sort of like saying, if you go to the gym 157 times and do these exercises, you will get abs. No one can tell you that. There are a ton of variables at play, including your starting point. That might be true for someone who's relatively fit, but if you're not, it'll take way longer than that. We have natural metabolisms and natural abilities, different starting points. The gym analogy is also a very poor one from the perspective that this shouldn't be a chore. In sum, just do it. Do it with enjoyment, and do it with a relaxed frame of mind. If you're so concerned with how long will this take, how many times should I do it, how often, shit, I haven't done it for a week, you need to go back to the first bullet point and reread it. Remember, this is not a means to an end, but an end in itself. Don't get hung up on it. There's nothing to lose here. You can only gain. Even if you only gain a brief feeling of peace, of state of mind, of relief, then is it not worth it? Reframe it. This isn't life or death, and if it is, then it's never going to work and you need to rewatch this. This is about naturalism. It will appear in your reality, and it will not be a surprise to you. That's the point of success. When you're like, well, of course. Having this in mind as an end goal, however, is also of somewhat limited utility in that you can't force it. This is one of the essential contradictions about all of this. Sometimes people warn me of overcomplicating what should be simple, and I agree, to an extent. Neville's work, however, is still being talked about, debated, and examined all these years later because it is a simple idea with a deceptive amount of depth.